The first time Pierce Valen accidentally called a stranger, he was standing barefoot on the marble floor of his penthouse kitchen, staring at the ocean through the glass wall, and wondering why all the money in the world hadn't fixed the ache in his chest. He didn't realize he hit dial until the phone was already ringing. "Hello," a soft, sleepy voice answered. Pierce blinked. He didn't know this voice. It wasn't his lawyer, or his assistant, or the interior designer who had been blowing up his phone about new office chairs.
Ah.
He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how silent his apartment felt.
Sorry.
Wrong number. There was a pause, then a subtle laugh.
Warm. Real.
Well, you sound disappointed about it. He could have hung up. Should have. But something in her voice made him stay. It didn't sound like anyone he knew in his world of deals, mergers, and glossy smiles. She sounded like she'd just woken up, like she'd been dreaming about something good. "I might be," he said before he could stop himself. She laughed again, and this time it hit him in the chest. "Well, I hope whoever you meant to call is worth chasing after." "I wasn't trying to call anyone," he admitted. That quiet for a beat. "So you just accidentally dialed a stranger at 7 in the morning. Apparently. Well, you've officially made this the weirdest Tuesday I've had in a while." He smiled. Actually smiled. "You want me to hang up?" She hesitated.
No.
"Not yet." And just like that, something shifted. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. They talked for 20 minutes about things that didn't matter: how she hated coffee but loved the smell of it, how he'd once gotten lost in Rome and ended up at a bakery at 2 a.m., how weird it was that two strangers were still talking on the phone when they should have said goodbye 10 minutes ago. When he finally did hang up, he stared at the screen, then added her number to his contacts under just one letter. Z. He didn't forget her voice all week. 3 nights later, he called again. "Hey," she said, not surprised this time. "You again?"
Yeah.
"That okay?" She laughed again.
Depends.
"Are you still accidentally dialing?" He leaned back on the couch. "Completely."
Her name was Zadie.
Zadie James. She was a third-grade teacher in a small public school in Brooklyn. Her car's air conditioning was broken. She liked thunderstorms. She lived in a walk-up where the pipes knocked at night and the neighbors played jazz too loud, and somehow, her voice made his penthouse feel less like a museum and more like a home. He didn't tell her who he was. Not exactly.
Not yet. She didn't ask.
2 weeks later, he found himself driving to Brooklyn. He sat in his black SUV outside a small brick building, staring at the name she'd once mentioned, Maplewood Elementary. He had no idea what he was doing. He hadn't told her he was coming. He hadn't told anyone. But then the school bell rang, and a flood of kids came rushing out. And there she was.
Zadie.
Her hair was pulled up. She had paint on her sleeve. She was hugging a little girl who had tears on her cheeks, whispering something, wiping her face gently. She didn't see him. She didn't know she was being watched. But something in that moment wrecked him. She was real. And he was in trouble. He left before she saw him. The next night he called. "Have you ever just watched someone from a distance?" he asked, without thinking. Zadie laughed. "That's creepy. I mean in a good way. Like, you see them for who they are when they don't know anyone's looking." She was quiet. "I think that's when you see the truth." He closed his eyes. "Exactly."
Why?
"Did you do that today?" His throat tightened. He wanted to tell her, but he couldn't.
Not yet.
"No," he lied. "Just thinking." They talked until midnight. And then he did it again. He drove back. This time with a plan. He called her the next day at 5 p.m. sharp. "Hey," she answered.
Come downstairs.
"What?" "I'm outside." There was silence. Pierce's heart slammed in his chest. He never did things like this. Ever. "You're here?"
Yeah.
"I wanted to see you." Zadie didn't answer for several seconds, then he heard her door slam. She came out in jeans and a hoodie, hair in a messy bun, no makeup. She looked exactly like he imagined. No better. She stepped onto the sidewalk and saw his car. Her eyes locked with his. And then she smiled. He stepped out of the SUV, feeling more nervous than he had in any boardroom. "You really came," she said. "I really did." She walked closer, arms crossed but smiling. "You're not what I expected." "Same." They went for pizza. Not some five-star place. Just a corner shop with booths that stuck to your jeans and soda that tasted like syrup. "Okay, so what do you actually do?" she asked between bites. He hesitated. "I run a company," he said slowly. "Like a tech company?"
No.
"Investments. Real estate. Private equity." He looked her straight in the eye. "I'm a millionaire." Multiple times over. She blinked. "Oh." He tensed. She stared at him, then shrugged.
Cool.
"You gonna finish that slice?" And just like that, the tension broke. He laughed.
No.
"Take it." She leaned in, stole the crust, and grinned.
Good.
"I was gonna take it anyway." He drove her home after, and when she got out of the car, she leaned through the open window. "I'm glad you called the wrong number." He looked at her. It wasn't wrong. She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I think I was supposed to call you." Zadie stared at him for a long second, then nodded once and walked inside. He watched her go. And that night, he couldn't sleep. Because he knew. He was falling for her. Pierce Valen, millionaire, alone in his penthouse, with every luxury at his fingertips. And all he wanted was the girl with paint on her sleeves and a soft voice that made him feel like home. And he wasn't letting her go. Zadie didn't invite him up that night. She didn't need to. The way she looked back over her shoulder before closing the door behind her, like she wasn't quite sure how this had happened, but also didn't want it to stop, was enough. Pierce sat in the car for a long time after she disappeared inside. No music. No calls. No thoughts, except one. He didn't want to go back to his penthouse.
He went anyway.
But the silence felt heavier than usual. The view of the ocean looked like it belonged to someone else. He passed the framed degrees and awards in his study, without the usual flicker of pride. When he stepped into his bedroom, he stared at the untouched side of the bed and realized just how used to being alone he'd become. That next week, he let meetings pile up. His assistant called twice to ask if he was planning to attend the board review on Thursday. He didn't answer either time. Instead, he found himself sitting in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn at 6 a.m, just to see if she'd show up for her daily walk to school. He didn't approach her. He just watched from inside, his hand wrapped around a paper cup that had long gone cold. She carried a canvas tote over one shoulder, a book sticking out the top. Her hair was down this time, waves tumbling over her shoulders like she hadn't tried to impress anyone. She paused at the corner, helped an elderly woman with her grocery cart, then crossed with a light. She didn't glance toward the coffee shop window. She didn't know he was there. He didn't go back to the penthouse that night either. Instead, he walked, blocks and blocks through unfamiliar streets, past bodegas and brownstones and cracked sidewalks, until he found himself standing beside a small city park. There was a bench near a fountain with chipped edges and graffiti scrawled across the base. He sat. A kid on a skateboard cruised past. Two women argued in Spanish near the swing set. Across the street, a man sold roasted peanuts from a cart that squeaked every time he turned it. It was the opposite of his world. And somehow, it felt more alive. That night, he called her again. "What's something you wish you hadn't given up on?" he asked as soon as she answered. Zadie didn't reply immediately. He heard the faint creak of her mattress, like she was shifting to sit up. "Painting," she said. "I stopped right after college. Life got busy. I told myself it wasn't practical." "You still have your supplies?" "I think so. Somewhere in a box." He leaned back against the headboard of the hotel room he'd checked into last minute. You should start again. She sighed. Maybe. One day.
No. Now.
You make it sound so easy. It is. You just have to stop believing it isn't. There was a pause, then her voice quieter. Why do you ask things like that? He closed his eyes. Because I want to know what matters to you. She didn't speak for a while. Then, you don't talk like other men. That's probably because I'm not like other men. I'm starting to believe that. The next night, he took her to a bookstore that stayed open late. It was her idea. She wanted to show him the poetry section. I used to come here in college, she said, brushing her fingers over the edge of a shelf. They'd let you sit on the floor and read for hours if you wanted. He followed her deeper into the aisles. Did you? Every Tuesday. It was the only night I didn't have a shift. He watched her crouch beside a bottom row, pulling out a thin book with a cracked spine. What was your favorite? He asked. She flipped through pages until she found one.
This.
He took it from her hands and read the lines silently. When he looked up, she was watching him. I never imagined you in a place like this, she said. And what did you imagine? I didn't. That's the thing. You're not what I thought I'd find when I answered that call. He placed the book back delicately. Neither are you. Afterward, they sat on a bench outside while the city moved around them. A siren wailed in the distance. The air smelled like rain on concrete. You always look like you're thinking 10 things at once, she said, nudging his arm lightly. I usually am. Anything I can help with? He turned to her, really turned. You already are. She blinked, then looked away. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't move away. I'm used to everyone wanting something from me, he said. Zadie's voice was steady. And what do you want? He didn't answer. Not with words. He leaned in and kissed her, slow and certain. She didn't hesitate. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead lightly against his. I don't know what this is, she whispered. I don't either, he admitted. But I'm not letting it go. 2 days later, the press found out. He was walking out of a restaurant in Midtown when the first questions hit. Mr. Valen, is it true you've been spending time in Brooklyn? Who's the woman? Are you finally dating someone? He didn't answer. He never did. But when he got back into the car, he pulled out his phone and stared at her name. He didn't call. Instead, he drove straight to her building. She opened the door in leggings and a sweatshirt, eyes wide. You saw? He asked. She nodded. I didn't mean for it to come out. I figured. He stepped inside. She closed the door behind him. I need to know something, she said, arms folded. Anything. Why me? You could have anyone. Models. Actresses. People who understand your world. He walked toward her slowly. Because you don't care about my world. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. She swallowed hard. I'm not built for that life. I don't know how to smile for cameras or deal with people digging into every part of my past. I've never even traveled outside the country. I'm not who they're expecting. He stopped in front of her. Neither am I. Her eyes searched his face. Then what happens now? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped parcel. Inside was a rolled canvas, her art supplies, the ones she thought she'd lost during a move years ago. He'd found them. Or rather, he'd had someone find them. She unrolled it, her fingers trembling. How did you? I asked. Her eyes welled. I don't know what to say. Say you'll paint again. She looked up at him. Only if you keep calling. He smiled. I was never going to stop. And she believed him. Because the man in front of her wasn't just a millionaire. He was something far rarer. He was sincere. It was just after 6 in the morning when Zadie stood at the small table in her kitchen, brushing butter over the top of a loaf of banana bread she'd pulled from the oven. Her apartment still smelled like cinnamon and sleep. The radio murmured low from the windowsill, half drowned out by the sound of a neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the hall. She wasn't dressed for work yet. Her hair was still tied up in the messy knot she'd slept in, and her socks didn't match. The knock on the door came without warning. Not loud, not rushed. Just steady. She froze, her hands still holding the brush. The timer on the oven beeped once, then quieted. Another knock followed. She wiped her hands on a towel and stepped to the door. "Who is it?" "It's me." She didn't need to hear more. She unlocked it slowly, then pulled it open. Pierce stood in the hallway, in a black sweater and dark jeans, no coat, his hands in his pockets like he didn't want to look too prepared. His hair was slightly out of place, like he'd run his hands through it too many times. There were shadows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I couldn't sleep." Zadie leaned against the doorframe. "You drove here this early because you couldn't sleep?" "I've been outside for 40 minutes. She blinked. "Why didn't you call?" "I didn't want to wake you." "But you knocked." "I needed to see you." She stepped back, holding the door open wider. He walked in slowly, glancing around like he wasn't used to being in places where nothing was curated. Her apartment wasn't messy, but it was lived in. A stack of lesson plans sat on the coffee table. There was a plant in the window that leaned hard toward the light. A small, framed picture of her and her younger brother sat beside a bowl of keys. "I was making breakfast," she said, shutting the door behind him. "You want some?" He nodded once. She walked back into the kitchen and grabbed another mug. He followed, standing beside the fridge as she poured him coffee from a chipped blue pot. She didn't ask how he took it. She just handed it over without sugar. He took a sip. "This isn't terrible. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my coffee." He watched her cut a slice of the banana bread. "Why didn't you tell me you were in the middle of a lawsuit?" she asked without looking up. He stopped mid-sip. "You've been reading the news," he said quietly. "I'm not an idiot, Pierce." He set the mug down. She placed the slice on a plate, then turned to face him. "You're being sued by a former partner for breach of contract. They claim you cut them out of a deal they helped broker. And you read that and thought what? That I don't know you." He didn't respond right away. He stepped closer, resting his hand on the back of a chair. "The man suing me was in business with my father before I ever took over. He used backdoor channels to reroute funds from a retirement housing project we were building in Queens. I shut it down and reported it. Now he's retaliating." Zadie studied him. "Why didn't you just tell me that?" "Because I didn't want you to see that part of my world yet." She crossed her arms. "The part with lawyers and corruption and power plays?" He nodded.
Exactly that.
"Well, that's not how this works." He looked at her, something sharp flickering in his eyes. "How what works? Whatever this is between us. You don't get to protect me by hiding things." His jaw moved once, like he was weighing something. "My father's name was on every deed. I had to go through court to remove it after he died. I've been cleaning up his messes since I was 23. That man suing me? He was at my father's funeral. He shook my hand and told me he'd take care of me. Then he tried to bankrupt one of our subsidiaries 6 months later." Zadie's voice softened. "You're still angry." "I'm still cleaning up blood that wasn't mine." She handed him the plate with the bread. "Then stop pretending you're not bleeding." He didn't move for a long moment. Then he took it, his fingers brushing hers. They ate in silence. She sat on the counter. He leaned against the wall. When she finished, she set the plate down beside her. "I saw my mom yesterday," she said. Pierce looked up. "She wants me to come home for her anniversary dinner next weekend. My dad passed 3 years ago, but we still do the dinner. She said it's tradition." He watched her carefully. "She asked me to bring someone this time." He didn't say anything. Zadie tapped her fingers against her knee. "She thinks I'm seeing someone." I didn't correct her. Pierce's voice was low. "You want me to come?" "I didn't say that. But you didn't say no either." She met his eyes. I don't want to explain you. I want them to see for themselves. He nodded slowly. Then I'll come. She exhaled like she hadn't expected him to agree. My mom is intense. And my uncle is a retired pastor who thinks no one under 40 should be allowed to date without a marriage license. Pierce smiled faintly. Sounds like an adventure. She slid off the counter. It's more like a test. I'm used to those. They stood facing each other in the small kitchen. The sun had started pushing through the blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the floor. Zadie broke the silence. What happened to your mother? He blinked.
What?
You never talk about her. His throat worked once. She left when I was 7. Where did she go? No one knows. Zadie stepped closer. You never looked for her? He looked away. I did. For years. Until I realized finding her wouldn't change what she chose. She reached out and laid her hand gently on his chest. He didn't move. I don't need you to be perfect, she said. But I need you to stop pretending you're not human.
His voice was strained.
I don't know how to do that. Well, start here. You're standing in my kitchen, drinking my subpar coffee, wearing yesterday's clothes, and you look like you haven't slept in a week. That's human. He let out a short breath, like something inside him had cracked open. Then he pulled her into his arms. Not like a man trying to make a move, but like someone finally letting go of something he'd carried too long. She didn't pull away. Later, when he left, he paused in the doorway. I'll pick you up Friday, he said. She nodded. Formal wear. No black suits. He raised a brow. Why not? Because you're not going to a board meeting. You're coming to dinner. He gave a single nod and left. Zadie closed the door and leaned against it. She didn't know what she was doing, but she knew he'd show up. And somehow, that was enough. The Valens didn't do dinners. Not the kind with mismatched chairs, homemade pie, and a dining room that smelled like rosemary and something baking in the oven. Pierce had been to 1,000 galas, hundreds of award ceremonies, and enough private rooftops to know how to make a toast with a perfectly chilled glass of champagne. But none of that prepared him for the moment he stood in front of Zadie's mother's house in Queens, holding a bottle of wine he wasn't sure anyone would drink, dressed in a navy sweater and khakis that hadn't seen daylight in years. He'd parked 2 blocks away, not wanting to draw attention with the car. And he needed the walk. The air was sharp with the bite of late autumn, the kind of cold that snuck in through the collar of your coat and made you wonder if you'd made the right choice stepping out in the first place. He rang the bell. Once. The door flung open almost immediately. You're early, Zadie said, stepping aside. That's either brave or dangerously optimistic. He stepped in, already catching the scent of something rich and buttery from the kitchen. I'd rather be early than late. She closed the door behind him. You brought wine. I didn't know what else to bring. She took it, studied the label, then raised her brows. This costs more than my rent. I'll take that as a compliment. Zadie's voice dropped. Okay. Ground rules. No talking about politics, no using the word synergy, and if my uncle starts quoting scripture, just nod like you've heard it before. Have I? You haven't. He followed her through the narrow hallway, past a series of photos on the wall, weddings, graduations, faded school portraits, and into a dining room already half filled. A woman stood at the head of the table, wearing a cranberry blouse and gold earrings that caught the overhead light. She turned when Zadie entered. Mom, this is Pierce. Her mother didn't blink. You're taller than I thought. Pierce extended his hand. It's good to meet you. She shook it briefly, then turned back to the dish she was arranging. You're not allergic to anything, are you?
No. Good. Sit down.
We're starting in 5. Zadie looked at him, out of the corner of her eye. Welcome to the deep end. He sat beside her as dishes were passed. Roasted chicken. String beans with toasted almonds. Something with cranberries and sweet potatoes that didn't look like anything he'd eaten before. Across the table, an older man with a thick beard and a voice like gravel leaned forward. "You work in finance?" he asked. Pierce swallowed. "Among other things. Dangerous game. Money makes men forget themselves." Zadie's mother cut in before he could respond. "Uncle Ray's been waiting all week to say that." Uncle Ray didn't smile. "I've buried men who thought they were too important to die." Pierce met his eyes. "I don't think I'm important. Just responsible." Zadie tried to hide her reaction, but her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Uncle Ray leaned back slowly. "We'll see." Dinner continued with loud conversation, overlapping stories, and passing bowls. Zadie's cousin knocked over a glass. A dog barked somewhere in the back room. Her mother asked if anyone had seen her good carving knife and then proceeded to find it in her apron pocket. At one point, Zadie reached under the table and touched Pierce's knee. Not in a romantic way. Just a reminder that he was still there. That she saw him. After dessert, a pie with a crust so flaky it broke under the knife, Zadie's mother pulled Pierce aside in the hallway while Zadie helped clear the table. "She's not like the women you're used to," her mother said, arms crossed. "She doesn't pretend." "I know. She's been hurt before." "Not by men. By life." "I have too." Her eyes narrowed. "You make her cry, I'll know before she does." "I'm not here to break anything." "Then don't treat her like a season." Pierce nodded once. Her mother stepped back, then handed him a container wrapped in foil. "Take this." She won't admit it, but she likes when people remember her favorite. He looked down. "Apple crisp."
Peach.
"Don't let her lie." Zadie appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "She's threatening you, isn't she?" Only softly. Zadie rolled her eyes. "You ready?" They said their goodbyes, stepped outside, and walked back toward the car. Pierce waited until they were 2 houses away before speaking. "Your family's intense. They're honest. I like that." She glanced at him. "You sure?" "I'm not used to it, but yes." They reached the car. He opened the door for her. Once inside, she held the container between them. "My mom gave you leftovers?" "She said it's your favorite."
Peach.
He looked at her. She exhaled. "She's good." The drive back was quiet but not heavy. When he pulled up in front of her building, she didn't get out immediately.
"I was worried," she said. "About what?"
"That they'd say something that would make you leave." "I don't scare easy." She turned toward him. "You're in this, aren't you?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached into the console and pulled out a small, flat box. She stared. "What is that?" "Open it."
She did.
Inside was a key. Not to his penthouse. Not to his car. To a studio space. A small one. In Brooklyn. With north-facing windows and hardwood floors. "I bought it last week," he said. "It's not for me. It's for you." Zadie's throat worked. "Why?" "Because you stopped painting. And you shouldn't have." She closed the box carefully. "You can't just fix things by buying space and handing me a key." "I know, but you did it anyway." "Because I see you." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "You didn't ask if I still wanted to paint." "I didn't have to." She brushed her fingers over the lid of the box. "If I use it, it's not for you. It never was." She opened the door and stepped out, then leaned down. "You're not simple, Pierce Valen. No one worth knowing is." She closed the door, walked up the steps, and didn't look back until she reached the top. He waited until she was safely inside before driving off. That night, she unlocked the studio alone. The room smelled like dust and fresh paint. There was nothing inside but light and space. She stood in the middle of it, breathing deeply. And then she smiled. The next morning, Pierce sat in his office, staring at the skyline, when his assistant knocked. "You have a visitor," she said. "I told you no meetings today." She said you'd want to see her. Before he could respond, Zadie stepped in, holding a rolled canvas in one hand and a takeout coffee in the other. She crossed the room, set both on his desk, and looked him straight in the eye. You were right. He raised a brow. About what? She unrolled the canvas. A rough sketch. Charcoal and paint. A man sitting in a chair, head bowed, hands clasped like he was praying. But he wasn't. He was just
tired. Pierce stared at it.
Zadie sipped her coffee. That's you. He didn't speak. I think I'm ready to start again. He looked at her. Good. She leaned forward. But this time, you don't get to just watch. You're in it with me. I already am. Zadie tilted her head. Then prove it. He stood, walked around the desk, and took her hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The first time Zadie stepped into Pierce's penthouse, it was raining. Not a soft drizzle, but a pounding storm that made the city blur behind sheets of water. Her jacket was soaked, her boots left faint prints across the polished floor, and her curls clung to her cheeks as she paused just inside the doorway, unsure if she belonged. The space felt like something out of a museum, vaulted ceilings, black steel beams, and tall windows that framed the storm like a painting. But it wasn't the opulence that made her hesitate. It was the silence. The kind that didn't come from peace, but from years of keeping people out. Pierce took her coat without a word and hung it on a rack near the elevator. He didn't offer her a tour. He just motioned toward the kitchen. I made something, he said, already walking ahead. She followed, her footsteps muffled against the dark wood. On the counter sat 2 bowls of a thick, golden soup, steam curling upward. You cook now. I hired someone to teach me. Zadie lifted a spoon. That's not the same thing. It is when you burn the first 2 batches and still try again. She tasted it. Her eyebrows lifted. You didn't ruin it. I nearly did.
Twice.
But I didn't want to bring you here and hand you a takeout menu. She set the spoon down. Why bring me here at all? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Because I want you to see what my world really looks like. Zadie glanced around. It's beautiful, but it's cold. I know. That's why I stopped inviting anyone into it. She walked to the window, watching lightning flash over the East River. This place feels like it was built not to be touched. Pierce joined her. It was.
My father designed it that way.
Every room was meant to impress someone. Does it impress you?
No.
Zadie turned to face him. Then why stay? Because I've been too afraid to admit I hate it. They stood there for a moment, the storm a low growl behind them. Pierce's voice dropped. I want to change it, but I don't know how to start. You already did, she said, setting her hand gently on the glass. You let me in. The next morning, she returned to Brooklyn before sunrise, stepping into the studio with a thermos of coffee and a fresh canvas. She didn't call him. She didn't need to. He knew where she'd be. She painted for hours, nothing planned, nothing precise. Just color and motion and the ache in her chest that had been building since the first time he kissed her. She didn't paint his face. She painted what he carried. By the time she stepped back, her hands were stained and her shoulders ached. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was chasing something impossible. That night, she met him at a rooftop garden he'd never shown anyone before. A place hidden above one of his smaller buildings in the West Village, where ivy climbed the brick walls and string lights hung from iron poles. The air smelled like basil and rain-soaked stone. He was already there, seated on a low bench, sleeves rolled up, his elbows resting on his knees. I didn't think you'd come, he said as she approached. Then you don't know me. I'm trying to. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Why here? I used to come here after meetings when I couldn't breathe. She glanced at him. And now? Now I come here when I want to remember I'm not alone. He pulled something from his coat pocket and handed it to her. A photograph, worn at the corners. A boy, maybe 6 years old, sitting on a swing, looking straight at the camera with a defiant tilt to his chin. Zadie turned it over. On the back, in faded ink, P, age 6. Wouldn't smile. My mother took that the day before she left, he said. Zadie ran her thumb along the edge. Why give it to me? Because I've never let anyone else see it. She handed it back, but he shook his head. Keep it. She stared at him. You sure? I'm tired of carrying it alone. A week later, the lawsuit hit the press again, this time with leaked emails and speculation about a potential criminal investigation. Zadie found out when one of her students asked if her fancy boyfriend was going to jail. She didn't answer. She just smiled tightly and changed the subject. That night, she stormed into his office without knocking. You said it was handled. Pierce looked up from his desk, jaw tense.
It was.
Then it wasn't. There are screenshots of contracts. Journalists are saying you falsified signatures. I know. Zadie stepped closer. Did you?
No.
Then why aren't you fighting back? He stood slowly. Because if I push too hard, they'll drag you into it. They've already started digging. I don't care.
Ida.
Zadie's voice cracked. Then stop acting like you're the only one who gets to protect something. He walked around the desk, standing inches from her. I've spent my entire life controlling what people see. You changed that. And now I can't undo it. She folded her arms. Then stopped trying to fix everything with silence. His hands dropped to his sides. I'm not used to being this exposed. I'm not asking you to be fearless. I'm asking you to be honest. Pierce's breath came slow. I might lose everything. Zadie didn't blink. Then lose it. But don't lie to stay safe. He didn't speak again. Just reached out and pulled her into him, gripping the back of her head like he didn't know how else to hold on. Later that night, she sat on the floor of her apartment, legs tucked beneath her, staring at her phone. She didn't call him. She didn't text. She just sat in the quiet, waiting for the weight in her chest to settle. It didn't. The next day, she was called into the principal's office. You're not in trouble, the principal said as soon as she stepped in. But I need to ask, has anyone from the media contacted you? Zadie froze. Why? Because 2 men in suits tried to question the receptionist this morning. They asked if you were on campus. Her stomach dropped. What did she say? She told them to leave. But you need to be careful, Zadie. Zadie nodded once and walked out. By the time she reached the studio that evening, she was shaking. She locked the door behind her and curled up in the corner, knees to her chest. She didn't cry.
But she wanted to.
An hour later, someone knocked twice. Then again. She stood but didn't move to open it. It's me. Pierce's voice called through the door. She unlatched it slowly. He stepped in, soaked from the rain, no umbrella, no coat, just a thin sweater clinging to his frame. They followed you, she whispered. I know. They came to my job. I didn't know that would happen. You should've. He looked at her. Say it. She shook her head.
Say it, Zadie.
You don't get to do this. You don't get to walk in here and act like this wasn't your fault. I know it was. Then fix it. He stepped closer. I'm going to.
How?
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She took it, her hands trembling. It was a signed statement. From the man suing him. An admission. Dated, notarized. Zadie looked up confused. I met with him today, Pierce said. I offered him a settlement in exchange for the truth. She stared at him. You paid him off. I gave him what he wanted most. His reputation back. But I made sure mine stayed intact. She let out a breath. You did that for you.
No.
I did it for us. Zadie folded the paper, her voice hoarse. So what now? Pierce stepped closer. Now I rebuild the parts of my life that matter. And me. He didn't hesitate. You're the only part that ever did. She pressed the paper to her chest, eyes burning. And this time, when he reached for her, she didn't hold back. The last week of October came in with wind that rattled window panes and a sky the color of wet ash. Zadie stood in front of the easel in her studio, hands streaked with ochre and burnt sienna, the smell of turpentine still clinging to her sleeves. She hadn't eaten since early afternoon, hadn't answered her phone since noon, hadn't checked the news since the day before when Pierce's name finally disappeared from the headlines. She hadn't seen him in 3 days. Not because she didn't want to, but because she needed the silence to think for herself. Not over him. Because of him. The painting in front of her was unfinished. A woman standing in a crowd of faceless shapes, her head turned towards something no one else could see. The lines were too sharp, the colors too dark, but it was honest. And for now, that was enough. A soft knock came from the studio door. Zadie wiped her hands on a towel, not surprised to open it and find her brother standing there, a hoodie pulled over his head and a brown paper bag in one hand. I brought those dumplings you used to inhale in college, he said, stepping inside. She locked the door behind him. You okay? He asked, setting the bag on the work table. Zadie sat on the edge of the bench. I'm trying to be. He opened the bag and handed her a container. Auntie Lay said you haven't been by in weeks. Mom's worried. I call her. Yeah, but you don't talk. Zadie took a bite of the dumpling. Still warm. Still perfect. You didn't come here to talk about Mom. He leaned against the wall. You're going to have to decide what you want out of this. I know. No, I mean really decide. Not just react. Not just wait for him to show up with another fix. She set the container down. You don't like him. I don't know him. But I know you. And I know when your heart's in something too deep. Zadie looked at the floor. So what? You think I should walk away? I think you should ask yourself what you're building. And whether he's building with you, or just looking for shelter. She didn't answer. He pushed off the wall, grabbed a dumpling, and kissed her on the head. Don't let someone else's storm pull you under. After he left, Zadie stared at the painting for a long time. Then she picked up the brush and kept going. 3 hours later, she walked the 5 blocks to her apartment. Her phone buzzed twice in her pocket, but she didn't check it. She was too cold and too tired. When she reached her door, she found a small envelope taped beneath the peephole. No name, just her initials in clean handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No message, just an address in Connecticut and a date. Saturday. She stared at it for a long time before folding it in half and slipping it into her coat pocket. The address wasn't familiar, but she knew who it was from, and she would go. 2 days later, she stood in front of a cast-iron gate at the edge of a long gravel drive. The trees overhead were bare, their branches reaching like fingers across the silver sky. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. She stepped through the gate. It creaked behind her. The walk took longer than she expected. A full 5 minutes before the trees opened to reveal a house smaller than she imagined, older too. Painted white, with black shutters and a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. Pierce stood on the porch steps, hands in his pockets. He didn't smile. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. What is this place? My mother's childhood home. I bought it last year. Zadie looked up at the roof. You never mentioned it. I wasn't ready to bring anyone here. She stepped onto the first step. Why now? Pierce looked down at his shoes. Because this is where everything started. And where everything broke. He turned and opened the door. She followed him inside. The house smelled like cedar and old paper. The floors creaked beneath her feet. There was no furniture. Only a few boxes stacked in the corners, a thick layer of dust on the windowsills, and a small framed photograph resting on the mantel. Zadie walked toward it. A woman in her 20s, standing in a kitchen, smiling faintly. Her hands were covered in flour. Her eyes looked like Pierce's. She used to bake every Sunday, he said behind her. Biscuits. Peach cobbler. Sometimes just bread. She said the house felt more alive when it smelled like something rising. Zadie turned to him. Why bring me here? Because I want you to know what I came from. Not the tower. Not the money. This. She sat on the floor, cross-legged. It's quiet. It used to be loud. There were cousins and Sunday dinners and music every night. Then one day she left. Took nothing but her purse. Zadie rested her hands in her lap. You never told me why. She wrote a note. Said she couldn't breathe anymore. That she felt like she was drowning beneath someone else's life. My father never read it. He burned it and told me to forget it. She looked up at him. Did you?
No.
Zadie waited. Pierce sat across from her, his knees drawn up. I've spent most of my life trying to become a man who didn't need anyone. Because needing someone meant giving them power to leave. She didn't interrupt. But I'm done living like that. I don't want to be the last man standing in a life I built alone. Zadie's eyes didn't leave his. Then what do you want? He reached into his coat and pulled out a box, a small one, wrapped in cloth. This isn't a proposal, he said. It's a promise. He opened it. Inside was a ring. Not flashy. Not enormous. Just simple, with a small stone set in the center. But etched on the underside of the band was something more. Her initials. And his. Zadie blinked. I'm not asking you to marry me today, he said. I'm asking you to believe in something with me. To build something that doesn't run when it gets hard. Something honest. Something that outlasts the storms. She stared at him, breath caught in her throat. You don't have to say yes.
You don't even have to take it.
But I needed you to know what I feel isn't temporary. Zadie lifted the ring from the box. She turned it over, ran her thumb across the engraving. Then she looked up. You never asked me what I want. Pierce's voice was quiet. What do you want? She held the ring between her fingers. I want to wake up next to someone who doesn't need to be perfect. I want to eat dinner at a kitchen table that wobbles. I want to paint without wondering if it's good enough. And I want to love someone who knows that truth matters more than safety. He didn't breathe. Zadie set the ring back in the box. Then she reached for his hand. You're not there yet, Pierce. But you're close. And I'm not walking away. He closed his fingers around hers. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. But inside, it was quiet. And warm. 2 months later, the house in Connecticut had furniture. Not much. A table, 2 chairs. A second-hand sofa that had taken 3 men to carry up the porch steps. Zadie's painting hung above the fireplace. The one she'd finished the week after the lawsuit ended. The faceless crowd. The woman with her head turned toward the light. Pierce stood in the kitchen, wearing an apron and stirring something on the stove. Burnt edges. Too much rosemary. But he didn't care. Because she was coming home. And for the first time, that word meant something real. Zadie stood in front of the long mirror in the bedroom of the Connecticut house, her fingers adjusting the cuff of her linen blouse. The winter sun filtered in through the window, casting a pale glow on the bare wood floors and the unmade bed behind her. A sketch pad lay open on the dresser, a half-finished charcoal drawing resting on the top page, a study of hands, strong and steady, holding a child's palm. Her fingers paused at her wrist, then dropped. She turned from the mirror and crossed into the kitchen where Pierce was leaning over a small pile of paperwork spread across the table. A cup of tea sat untouched at his elbow, steam curling upward while his pen hovered just above the page. I found a program, Zadie said, arms folded across her stomach. One for kids who've been through foster care. They teach creative expression, painting, movement, music. It's run out of a community center in the city. Pierce looked up. You want to teach? She nodded. I don't want to go back to the school.
Not yet.
But I want to be useful again. He stood and came around the table, resting his hands gently on her waist. Then do it. There's an application. They're not hiring, but they take volunteers. Where do I sign you up? Zadie gave him a quiet look. They'll ask questions about my connection to you. And if they do, I'll tell them I'm with someone who believes in second chances. He rested his forehead against hers. That's the only kind of future I want. Later that afternoon, they drove into the city together. The car moved slow along the back roads, tires crunching over old patches of snow. Zadie wore a scarf she'd borrowed from his coat closet, one he never wore, still tagged and forgotten beneath a row of suits. He reached over once and adjusted it without speaking, his fingers brushing her collarbone like he was memorizing something he didn't want to forget. They parked on a quiet street near the center and walked the last block to the community hall. The building was old, red brick with green trim and a large mural that wrapped around one side children holding hands, their faces unfinished, waiting for someone to fill in the color. Inside, the smell of old wood and paint thinner clung to the walls. A woman in her 50s with silver curls and a patchwork skirt greeted them. Her name was June. She didn't ask for Zadie's resume. She didn't ask for her credentials. She just looked her in the eye and said, "We've had too many people walk through these doors who wanted to be seen. You look like someone who came to see." Zadie's voice caught. "I did." June nodded. "Come Thursday." The middle school groups got more stories than they know how to tell. Pierce offered his hand, but June hugged him instead. "You're welcome too. But if you try to write a check before you pick up a paintbrush, I'll send you home." "I'll bring coffee," he said. "Only if it's strong." They left with paint under their fingernails and a flyer tucked into Zadie's coat pocket. The sky had turned lavender by the time they reached the car. Pierce adjusted the mirror and glanced at her. "You want to stay in the city tonight?" Zadie looked at the skyline rising in the distance.
No.
"Let's go home." She reached for his hand across the console. He laced his fingers through hers and squeezed. That weekend, they hosted their first dinner in the Connecticut house. Zadie lit candles in the windows and filled the kitchen with the scent of roasted rosemary and citrus. Pierce set the table, mismatched plates and all, and opened the windows just enough to let in the cold, fresh air. Her brother arrived first, with a bag of rolls and a new sketch pad tucked beneath his arm. "I started drawing again," he told her. "Nothing fancy. Just to get it out of my head." Zadie hugged him. "That's how it starts." Her mother came next, carrying a warm casserole dish and a tin of lemon cookies. She didn't comment on the house. She just touched the mantel with one hand and said, "It smells like family in here." When everyone was seated, Pierce poured water into their glasses and raised his own. "I'm not good at speeches," he said, "but this house was empty a year ago, and now it's got warmth, and noise, and people who matter."
I'm grateful. For you.
For her. For the chance to do something better. They clinked glasses.
No applause.
Just quiet smiles and the scrape of forks against plates. Later, when the dishes were done and the guests had gone, Zadie stood barefoot at the back door, her fingers resting lightly against the frame. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The trees moved in slow rhythm, their branches swaying like dancers beneath a pale moon. Pierce came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I have something for you," he said. Zadie leaned back against him. "If it's another key, I'm going to make you take it back. No more keys." She turned in his arms. He reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small velvet box. Not the cloth-wrapped one from before. This was new.
Different.
Her breath caught. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't need to. "I bought this before I built the studio," he said. "Before the lawsuit ended. Before I knew if you'd still want me after the dust settled." Zadie's voice was barely there. "Then why wait?" "Because I wanted to ask when it wasn't about fixing anything. When it was just about love." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Rose gold. A quiet sparkle. Nothing extravagant. But engraved along the inside, in the smallest, cleanest script, were 3 words. Still choosing you. Zadie's eyes filled instantly. Pierce's voice dropped. I know what it means to be abandoned. And I know what it means to live in survival mode. But I also know what it means to trust someone with the parts of yourself you've tried to bury. You saw me. And you stayed. She couldn't answer. She just nodded, over and over, until he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into him. They stood there for a long time, her face pressed against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, while the wind knocked gently against the windows. The wedding was held in the garden behind the house the following spring. There were no invitations. Just a handwritten note sent to a few friends and family. The ceremony was small 30 chairs, a string quartet, and a path of white petals leading from the porch to the arbor Zadie's brother built by hand. She wore a dress with sleeves that danced in the breeze and a crown of wildflowers. Pierce wore linen and left his tie off. June officiated, reading from a poem Zadie had once shown her, the one she used to sit on the floor of the bookstore and read over and over again in college. When they exchanged vows, Pierce didn't read from a card. He simply took her hands in his and said, I used to think love was a risk I couldn't afford. Now I know it's the only thing worth losing everything for. Zadie's voice shook as she whispered, You didn't save me. You saw me. And I never want to be unseen again. They kissed beneath the open sky, with the trees overhead and the people they loved surrounding them like a circle of warmth. Afterward, they danced barefoot on the lawn. Her brother played guitar. June baked the cake. Her mother cried 3 separate times. And when the last guest had gone and the candles had burned low, they sat on the porch swing, fingers intertwined, and watched the stars. Zadie leaned her head on his shoulder. You're not that man anymore. Pierce looked down at her. Which one? The one who lived behind glass. He kissed her temple.
No.
I'm not. Because you opened the door. She smiled and closed her eyes. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to welcome. Together. Always.